Welcome back to our video series on language structures. If you're new here, my name is Anna DiGilio, and on this channel we talk about all things structured literacy, science of reading research. We are digging into all things reading instruction. So I'm so happy you're here. And again, if you're new, please click that little subscribe button and that little bell next to it so you're alerted every time one of my new videos goes live. So today we are jumping into learning about prepositions and pronouns and how to address them in the classroom when it comes to strengthening semantics and then ultimately language comprehension. One thing is, if you haven't watched my first video called Understanding Semantics, please be sure to go back to that first video and watch that, because it really lays the foundation necessary to dive into the videos that focus on these individual activities. So make sure you go on back to that first one and start there, because this was a 7-video series. With that being said, before we jump in, let's just take a quick peek at Scarborough's reading rope. So if you're looking at Scarborough's reading rope, we are focusing on the language comprehension strands of the rope, which are the upper strands. And semantics is nestled nicely underneath that strand called language structures. Now that we talked about what we're addressing on Scarborough's reading rope, let's dive in. One important aspect of understanding semantics is understanding the role of prepositions in language. Let me start with an example. Have you ever tried learning a foreign language? When I was in high school, I spent a few years trying to learn a new language. And most of my teachers focus their efforts on having us memorize vocabulary list after vocabulary list. And when all was said and done, I learned hundreds of words in this language. I could name every fruit, vegetable, color, clothing item, a sport in the language, and of course, how to find a bathroom, right? But I didn't learn, or at least I didn't retain, the secret sauce, of language. All those little words that actually explain what was happening. This led to the sometimes common situation where I could pick up a magazine that was in that particular language and pick out a few words and say, oh, this article had something to do with eating in a restaurant. I really couldn't tell you what was happening kind of beyond that. Was it a restaurant review? Was it a fictional story about a chef? Was it giving directions to the bathroom in that restaurant? Who knows? I didn't know. I just knew the vocabulary words, And the exact same thing can happen in the English language when the reader doesn't understand the function of prepositions. Before I show you exactly what I mean by that, let's just start with the basics. What are prepositions, and why is it important for teachers to explicitly teach them to young learners and readers? Prepositions are small but really, really mighty words that help us describe the relationship between different objects in a sentence. They help us understand where, when, and how something's actually happening. Like words like in, on, under, over, next to, in between. More specifically, prepositions come before a noun to show direction, time, place, location, or even spatial relationships. Let's look at an example with a cat and a box, okay? The prepositions in these sentences will tell us a lot about what's actually going on. If we say the cat is in the box, the preposition in tells us where the cat is. If we say the cat is on the box, the preposition on gives us a completely different picture. And if we say the cat is next to the box, we again have a completely different picture, right? Let's remove all the prepositions in that sentence and it becomes the cat is the box. Do you see how wildly different the meanings in these sentences are with the inclusion of certain prepositions? Can you imagine how confusing these sentences would be if the reader had no knowledge of prepositions? This is similar to what I experienced as a foreign language learner, who could identify certain vocabulary words and what they meant, but really couldn't comprehend the sentences that contained those words. As you can see, for young readers, understanding prepositions is absolutely necessary for reading comprehension to actually occur. Knowing where and when things happen in a story really allows readers to follow stories more easily and really visualize the scenes that are described in the text, because we always want readers to do that. We want them to visualize in their heads, right? I bet you're starting to see why understanding prepositions really pays off for our young learners and readers, and how important it is that we address those in the classroom. What's more important is that it absolutely doesn't have to be complicated or time-consuming to do this. You don't need an hour-long lesson to do this. You could do these little bouts of like mini lessons to really dig in to this concept and have your students understand what they're reading and what they're learning. So I'm going to show you one of the activities that I've used to teach prepositions. If you've watched some of my previous videos about semantics, you know that I complete like a semantics warm-up activity with students every single time we're about to read a new book. So students can become familiar with key vocabulary that will appear in the book. It's kind of like a little bit of like front loading. When a book really lends to it, I will be sure to choose prepositions as my quick warm-up activity. Now remember, in the last 6 videos, we went over all different ways you could do these short little bursts of semantics activities right before you introduce a book in your small group reading instruction or a decodable book. Whatever book you're using, hopefully you're using decodable books, especially kindergarten, first grade. But all of these activities should and can be used with decodable books. Always, okay? Let's take this book, Bees Stay in the Mountains. This is one of our decodable books from our Structured Literacy with Ease program. Structured Literacy with Ease is an incredible structured literacy curriculum that's a Tier 1 foundational program with Tier 2 supports as well. Tons of differentiation and, of course, ELL supports as well. So if you're interested or looking for a great structured literacy program, check out Structured Literacy with Ease. Let's jump back into this. So we're going to use Bees Stay in the Mountains for this example. So in this book, one of the key terms we're going to focus on is the word coast. So we're going to focus on the word coast from this book. So first, I'm going to help my students define and understand the meaning of the word coast in the book. Then I will give students opportunities to use that word in sentences that focus on the use of prepositions. First, with pictures of a coast displayed. So I would absolutely show them a picture of what a coast is. I would ask students to describe what they're seeing by telling what's happening and or the location of things in the picture. I'll start with an example like the waves crash into the rocks and on the sand. I would make sure to use the focus word coast in the sentence. I would write or display the sentence somewhere that students can see it. Then I would go through the sentence and identify any words that come before a noun to show direction, time, place, location, or spatial relationships. So in this sentence, those words are into and on. I underline these words and say, I have found prepositions in this sentence. Students then will work with partners or in small groups to describe what they see in the images of the coast. The only rules are that students must use the word coast in their sentences to reinforce the focused vocabulary word, and that they tell what they see by describing the objects in relation to each other or the location of things in the picture. Again, depending on your student's ability, you can either ask them to find and underline the prepositions in their sentences with their partners or a group, or you can have them pause once they have created their sentences and then kind of join back together as a group or a class where every group will share their sentences. And you'll work together to identify the prepositions that they put in their sentences. If prepositions are newer to my students, and we've never done any type of mini lesson on this, I will use this approach because they still need quite a bit of modeling for how to identify the prepositions. Once they're familiar with them, however, I'll kind of turn them loose to identify the prepositions before they come back to share with the group. Now, activities like this can really pay off over time because students can quickly identify prepositions. Like many other grammar skills, this skill eventually folds into like our automatic language repertoire, and we don't have to expend so much mental energy to use or interpret the prepositions correctly. But we should never ever make an error of assuming that students just kind of acquire this skill automatically when they learn to speak, and that we don't have to spend time discussing it. It's really something important that you focus some time on and address those prepositions. Now, we're going to jump in and we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about teaching and addressing pronouns in the classroom to strengthen semantics. Again, it lives under those language structures inside of Scarborough's reading room. One important aspect of understanding semantics is understanding the role of pronouns in language. So again, let's begin with the basics. What are pronouns, and why is it important for teachers to explicitly teach them to your young learners and readers? Pronouns are special words that take place of nouns. Words like he, she, it, they, we, and you. Pronouns help us to avoid repeating the same name or words over and over and over again in our writing. Let's take an example. Instead of saying, Lisa likes Lisa's book, we can use pronouns and say, Lisa likes her book. So using pronouns makes stories and sentences smoother and easier to read. Imagine you were writing a story about a girl named Sarah and had to say Sarah every single time you talked about her. It would sound like this. Sarah went to the park. Sarah played on the swings. Sarah liked when Sarah saw a bird. That's a lot of Sarahs. But with pronouns, we could say Sarah went to the park and played on the swings. She liked when she saw a bird. So much better, right? Pronouns make sentences clearer and shorter. Imagine if we had to repeat the same words all the time. It would definitely be confusing, right? Not only confusing to adults, but confusing to children. I think most teachers have been in the situation where you've read a piece of student writing and every single sentence starts with the same name or word or the dreaded word I, right? I did this, I did this, I did this, right? We've all been there as teachers. Pronouns really help tremendously in this case. We can explain to students that the reader already knows that they're talking about Joe and that they can replace his name with the word he. I may also give a quick tip to combine two of these sentences together to again avoid further repetition. But understanding pronouns helps with more than creating clear, concise writing. For young readers, understanding pronouns really helps with reading comprehension because pronouns guide readers through the story, showing who is doing what without repeating the names all of the time. Hopefully now you can see how understanding pronouns really pays off for our young learners and readers, and how important it is that we address pronouns in the classroom. But again, just like all of the other semantics activities we talked about, it doesn't have to be complicated or time-consuming to do this. You don't need an hour-long lesson to teach pronouns. We could do this in little spurts to teach the concepts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one of the activities I've used to teach pronouns. Now, if you've watched my previous videos on semantics, you know that I complete a semantics warm-up activity with students every time we're about to read a new book so that students can become familiar with a key vocabulary or key vocabulary terms that are going to appear in the book. So when the book lends itself to it, I try to choose pronouns as a quick warm-up activity. That's what I do every time I'm going to introduce a new book, especially, of course, a decodable book that I'm hoping that you're using. Starting with a quick semantics activity will allow you to focus on key vocabulary and doing like a little bit of front loading before you jump into the book that you're about to read with your small group or individual students. Today, we're going to take this book, Fort Steve, as our example. This is a decodable book that's part of, again, our Structured Literacy with Ease program. So definitely check that out at structuredliteracy.com. In this book, one of the key terms we're going to focus on is the word fort. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to help students by defining and understanding the meaning of the word fort that they're going to find in this book. Again, this is a quick vocabulary activity to do a little bit of front loading, right? So to do this, I'm going to define the word and I'm going to use it in a sentence, and I'll show students pictures of different forts. This is how we'll start this. Next, I'll pre-write several sentences that feature the focus word, and in this case, that word is fort. Most importantly, I make sure the sentences have a variety of nouns, and then I underline those nouns. The student's job is going to be to figure out what pronouns can replace the underlined nouns in the sentences that I give them. Next, I'm going to pre-write several sentences that feature the focus word, and in this case, again, that focus word is fort. So let's take a look at these sentences. Steve, Tess, Bart, and Star made a fort. Steve's dad made dinner. Star and Tess put the tarp over the fort. Steve liked the flags Star and Tess got. Tess made a horse for the fort. So as you can see, I make sure the sentences have a variety of nouns, and then of course, I underline those nouns. Then the student's job is going to be to figure out what pronouns will replace the underlined nouns. Now, another version of this activity would be to have each student write a sentence that uses the focused vocabulary word, or have them find sentences in the book that contain that word. So of course, if I'm looking here at page 6 of Fort Steve, you could see that I used one of my little Post-it flags to highlight the word. Then what I'll do is I'll invite students to share their sentences. After sharing their sentences aloud, I'll choose a few of them and I'll write them where all the students can see them. And then we'll choose sentences that represent a variety of nouns so that the students can then practice finding and underlining the nouns and then replacing them with pronouns. Of course, what's most important before we do this activity is that you've already done some type of activities or lessons on nouns. They've got to know what a noun is in order to do pronouns. So it's really important that before you do an activity on semantics, on pronouns, you've already done some type of instruction on nouns. That's really important. You need a little bit of kind of pre-teaching of nouns before you touch on pronouns. As an extension, you can also ask students to search through the book and find sentences with pronouns. This is something students love to do. They love to go on hunts. And then you can ask students to identify which noun each pronoun represents. Remember, these are getting a little bit more complex activities, right? And again, another easy, fun activity is by using these little translucent Post-it flags where students can go and search and look through the decodable book and find pronouns that represent nouns. Again, such an easy, fun way of going on a little pronoun hunt and finding them in the book that they're going to read. So they already have a little bit of knowledge of what the book's going to be about because they've looked through it already. They're looking for pronouns. So this is just a really easy, fun way of using these little flags. And one thing, I know these are not inexpensive, but here's just a quick tip for you. I'll take a little file folder, like a regular manila file folder, cut it in half, laminate it. So now you have a little tiny file folder and laminate it. And when the students are done using the flags, stick them in the laminated folder and you can use them over and over again until they lose their stickiness. But it's a good way of not just using these little flags one time and be done. You just take them off when the students are done, put the little laminated file folder in front of them and just have them stick them on there. So it's an easy way of still using Post-it flags and not having to waste them for one lesson. So just a quick little tip for you. So with that being said, there really are no shortage of ways to practice pronoun use. And again, this activity is just one quick way that I make sure to include pronouns within my semantics activities. I hope you give this simple strategy a try in your classroom and really, really watch how your students become more confident in their understanding and use of pronouns. Remember, every single word counts, and prepositions and pronouns are the keys to unlocking the power of language. The next time you're reading a book, pay attention to those little words that tell us so much about where, when, and how, and those other little words that take the place of nouns. Prepositions and pronouns really are powerful tools that make our language really rich and exciting. And it's important to explicitly teach them for students. That's it. This is it. This was video 7 in our Semantics series. I hope you enjoyed this series on semantics. If you've been following it for the last couple of weeks, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've taken a few little nuggets away that you could bring into your classroom on focusing on how to really explicitly teach the strands in Scarborough's reading rope, because I know this is an area that teachers sometimes might feel a little unsure of or just not sure how to address it, right? So I hope this helped a little bit. I hope you can bring these quick little activities that I shared on this video series on semantics and you can bring it back to your classroom. So we are going to continue going all the way through Scarborough's reading rope, and we are going to attack and we are going to learn all of those language comprehension strands, those upper strands of the rope, and how we teach them in our classroom. So I hope you'll stick around with me, and I hope again you'll click that little subscribe button and that little bell next to it so you're alerted every time one of my new videos goes live. And again, please post a comment below. I love messages and comments in all of my YouTube videos. So please post your questions below. Post your requests below for videos. I love getting video requests from the viewers of my YouTube channel. So definitely post a comment, question, or a request below. I love getting those messages. Thanks so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. And remember, a few minutes a day can really, really, really make a huge impact on our students' language comprehension. So thanks so much for watching. I truly appreciate you. Happy teaching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.